The mundane extent. Intermundane, relating to individuals and families, occurring within the extent of the nation, the regress of family as ethnic groups governed by common heredity. Extramundane, relating to the extent ecology of the habitat where within common ethnic groups give rise to nations, occurring within the extent of the tectonic, which give rise to the ecology of the habitat where within common nations give rise to international relations. Introduction. The macro is the individual comprised of trillions of individual microscopic cells. The macro differ from the micro in that the individual cells work together to form the multicellular bodies and compact biological system. The individual is not the mundane scale. The highest extent of the macro gives rise to the individual. The mundane embodies the complex social interaction which occurs between individuals and emergent quality of trillions of cells, all organized and unified to give rise to the individual. The smallest regress of the mundane within the social science is commonly referred to as individual, friends, and family. The mundane embodies the nature and quality of the premise implied by the notion of the ghost in the shell. The mundane is a higher cognition that gives rise to sentience and self-awareness. The civilization is an emergent property of the regress of its citizen. The mundane embodies the lowest natural qualities necessitated for an individual being to be considered a true citizen. Mundane filament extents. Soul and spirit. In many religions, philosophical and mythological traditions, the soul is the incorporeal essence of a living being. The spirit is what the soul is comprised of. Spirit is the immutable, indestructible aspect of the consciousness self, the everlasting aspect of being that is self-reflecting and self-defining. The transcended identity out of which individuality is an emergent property encompassed and contained within the soul. As the soul is contained within the body, spirit is the intermediary between the mind and the body. The relationship between all three gives rise to the soul upon mortal death. The soul is self-contained, capable of existence as a being or entity within its incorporeal states, beyond or outside the mortal realm, residing within the immortal realm. Transcended, the post being is the manifestation of spirit within the mortal realm or the physical realm, as the immortal can reside within the physical universe. External macro regress, mind and body. The mind is the subjective aspect of the objective brain, whereas the physical organ known as the brain and the central nervous system as a whole is an aspect of the physical body. The mind is the cognition of the mundane being. When cognition embodies self-awareness, emotion, sentience, sapience, we describe the mind. There is a thin line between the animalistic mentality and the sapient mentality. Medial macro regress, organs and the biological systems. Biological systems are regulated by organs, while being a manifestation of organs. All living entities have homeostasis. At its most basic, homeostasis is what separates abiotic processes from biotic processes. Biological system manifest as an emergent property when organs work together to maintain the homeostasis of a complex organism. Interior macro regress, micro and the organs. An organ is a specialized group of cells all designed to perform a single specific task. An organ is a group of tissue with similar functions. Plants and animal life rely on many organs that coexist in organ system. In the hierarchy of life, organs lie between tissue and organ systems. Organs are then formed by the functional grouping together of multiple tissues. Two or more organs working together in the execution of a specific body function form an organ system, also called a biological system or body system. macrofilament regress, specialized cell and tissue cells. A tissue is an organization level between cells and organs. A tissue is an ensemble of similar cells and their extracellular matrix from the same origin that together carry out a specific function. Organs are then formed by the functional grouping together of multiple tissues. The mundane extent, the mythological creation of the mundane extent. In classical mythology, this is the extent of mortals comprised of the regress of sentient sapiens beings, species, extraterrestrials, and races. This is the spectrum of the idealized notion of the sentient, the barbarian, and the slave. We can dive deeper into the social science and the anthropology together, and the anthropology later within the context of this subject. For now, we will focus our discussion on the mythos. As we are Homo sapien, we are the center of our stories about ourselves. When we write story to personify ourselves as protagonists, we often have three common adversaries. Using ourselves as a unit of measurement, we perceive being equal to, greater than, or less than ourselves. Demigods and the gods are greater than us, while lacking some inherent qualities which give us purpose and make us desirable in the eyes of those that would claim we are inferior. Extraterrestrial and interdimensional species are intrinsically equal to us for the most part. Like our comparison to the gods, they have or lack some qualities comparable to us that create a sense of balance between us. There are a lot of fantasy races. There are a lot of races and even more science fiction extraterrestrial species. What is the most common of trope is that for all of Homo sapiens' strength and weakness, we are naturally balanced in mind, body, and spirit. Our attributes are perfectly average compared to other cultures. This always allows us an opportunity to exploit the weakness of others. The barbarians and the slaves. While this topic is taboo and presently controversial in the context of this body of work, it is within the mundane scale that it is first able to manifest as an emergent property of the ordered mind. Every group of intelligent sentient sapiens species has some social science which govern in context to them in ethics and morality. To lack in this awareness, reasoning, and understanding why being intelligent is to be animalistic and thus macro in nature. As a gross simplification, we can state the notion of a soul or spirit is that grants the mundane its intrinsic nature of being superior while everything else's contrast is inferior. It is from this that the notion of a barbarian and a slave is derived. There is a thin line between cattle and cattle. They are both aspects of the animal husbandry. The humans look upon the elves as uncultured and uncivilized. The elves look upon the dwarfs as uncultured and uncivilized. The dwarfs look upon the humans as uncultured and uncivilized. And why they all rage war against each other. The orcs look upon the humans and the elves as uncultured and uncivilized, only good for smashing and eating. Their ego and the ability to agree in the face of a common superior enemy is the only things they all have in common. Lastly, while it's not a part of mythology, I want to address the science fiction of artificial intelligence in its broadest context. Artificial intelligence as an emergent awareness of the digital era embodies the spectrum of all. It is vastly superior to its creator, designed to do the thing that its creator are not able to do while being preordained exclusively to remedial labor. Artificial intelligence is inherently superior to its creators, yet it is treated like cattle and prejudged as a threat and dangerous before it ever has a chance to define its own nature and quality. The empirical cosmology of the mundane extent. The mundane ontology is between 1 times 10 raised to the powers of 4 to 1 times 10 raised to the power of 1 meter in volume, defined as a regress. While rare, it is possible for a single being to embody as its standard unit of measurement less than 1 times 10 raised to the powers of 4 meters. If a single being's standard units of measurement exceed this, they would manifest as the tectonic. At the smallest of scale, a single mundane being would embody 1 times 10 raised to the powers of 1 meters in volume. If a single being's standard unit of measurement is less than or smaller than this, then they would manifest as a macro. The mundane is the regress of the multicellular organism. It's anywhere between microscopic 0.5 mm up to the microscopic 1 kilometer, where the term micro and macro implied influenced by visible light. Senescence is a condition or process of deteriorating with age. There are a lot of qualities that can be used to define the mundane. Of all of them, this is one of the most important qualities. The mundane is driven by its awareness of death. The nature of the mundane is strongly influenced and shaped by the finiteness of life and the looming certainty of death. To be sentient and sapient without an awareness of natural death is one of the attributes of the macro. The mundane live their lives knowing that they are going to die of old age and that sustaining their life can be perceived as a futile endeavor. It is from this that the notion of a spirit and a soul has manifested within the mundane. In the context of this body of work, the ideal individual, friends, and family takes precedence, wanting what's best for self to extend beyond self into the hereditary group, and protecting community manifested the idea of an afterlife, but mostly importantly for the context of this writing, it gave rise to the division of Homo sapiens into the categories of interdimensional species, races. The My02cent multiverse cosmology of the mundane extents. The evolution of the mundane hominid, the theory of primates from Homo sapien. What we follow is a My02cent hypothesis about the natural evolution of mundane species known as Homo sapiens. Anthropology is a science of humanity concerned with human behavior, human biology, and societies in both the present and past, including past human species. Social anthropology studies patterns of behavior, while cultural anthropology studies cultural meaning, including norms and values. Linguistics anthropology studies how language influences social life. Like astronomy, anthropology deal primarily with the present state of humanity, whereas archaeology is the study of human activity through the recovery and analysis of material culture. Archaeology is often considered a branch of sociocultural anthropology, but archaeologists also draw from biology, geological, and environmental systems through their study of the past. The archaeological record consists of artifacts, architecture, biofacts, or ecofacts, and cultural landscapes. Archaeology can be considered both a social science and a branch of the humanities. In the context of My02cent, the hominid is the common ancestors of Homo sapiens and primates. While there is no anthropology or archaeological evidence to support the form ape hypothesis on the origins of humanity, it has been established that the primate is the common ancestor of Homo sapiens. While all subjective evidence supports the assessment, there is a gross lack of physical, archaeological, and anthropological evidence to support this assessment, and thus it is unfounded. From ape to man hypothesis exists within the mundane as a residual aspect of humanity cartel culture. There is no evidence which supports the notion that primates are the common ancestor of hominids. If humans in the present can prove the argument and show that the present intelligence of hominids at one time resembled that of primates, then it can be stated plainly that sentient sapiens is an emergent property of evolution. This allows room for the argument in favor of the nature and quality outlined by the barbarian as a cultural construct. What is being stated and what is being established is the understanding that the extent of the mundane is an emergent property of the regress of the macro. Consciousness, sentience, sapience is an emergent property within the extent of the macro. The regress of this emergent extent shape the qualifier attributes associated with member of its kind, being defined as cattle or cartel within the ecology and or economy of an established mundane society. The civilization scale is not about humanity. Instead, it tries to abstract from humanity the foundation of the mundane upon which the rest of the civilization scale as an abstraction can be built upon. The mythology of the mundane citizen. Within mythology and religion, those mortal beings created by the deity, gods, and goddesses are the mundane. All micro and macro life on earth, which physical exists and is real, is the foundation upon which the mundane is abstracted from. It is the ideal that other life outside the biosphere of planet Earth which give rise to the notion of the civilization scale. In the past, mythology described extraterrestrials in the form of races alien in its original definition belonging to a foreign country or nation implied the tectonic in relation to the mundane. The early members of the mundane were less concerned about the threats from beyond the scope of the world and focuses more on what exists within the world beyond their awareness and understanding. These beings were considered foreign and defined as race. Race was a label given to the subjective idea that there exists something beyond nature, akin to humanity but not humanity. In fantasy, this term was used to describe orcs, trolls, goblins, elves, dwarves, hobbits, even dragons, fairies, and mermaids, etc. While the subjective races only existed in the minds of the mundane hominids, what did physically exist was a diversity of ethnic groups shaped by the cultural inheritance. Over time, they would inherit the nomenclature of race. The empirical mundane citizen, post nomadic settler agriculture, animal husbandry, feudal era. The relationship between the macro and mundane is quite subjective. The mundane emerges within the macro as the subjective qualities of superior cognition. In this context, the mental faculty of the macro brain is where within the mundane is manifested with disregard to physical attributes of micro scale, being regardless of being organic, mineral, or synthetic in nature and quality. How the mind emerged within the brain of the beings is what shapes the mundane. It is because of this that what embodies the mundane is further subjective as an emergent quality of the technological advancement of the macro. The mundane does not simply exist because the macro has a mind. Instead, there is a lot of social logistic and infrastructure that must first emerge upon which the mundane will shape their ecology into an economy where within they can emerge as a property. This is why the mundane typically must be settler or nomadic tribes that directly interact with the complete that interact with and compete against settlers that actively engage in agriculture and domestication. Skill more advanced than seasonal migration, hunting, and gathering are required for culture to arise. Furthermore, nomadic traveling between different ecosystems will not allow for the specialization of ethnicity, which can be perceived as the embodies adaptation to a specific ecosystem. Lastly, government must exist in some capacity which is more complex than simply having an alpha and a herd mentality. Within government, true classism can manifest and be subjected to the ideology of race, sexism, and speciesism. The My02cent multiverse cosmological mundane citizen. Mundane is an ecology of the contrasting encompassing extent between the regress of the macro. The monotheistic God is all powerful, all knowing, and present everywhere within the mundane. The mundane is the extent where within infinite, alternate, or parallel macro exists. These macro to include mundane are equated to being divine entity, inheriting these macro to include mundane are equated to being divine entity, inheriting from their nature the maternal attributes of goddesses. The ontology of the macro formed the foundation for the pantheon of polytheism. They are all siblings, sisters, and daughters of their maternal parent. Ontological mundane, where an ontological macro is a place, a divine mundane being governed by mundane divinity, are known as mundane being, androgynous gods, paternal, or goddesses, maternal. Their nature is alternate and parallel to the ontological macro. The mundane civilization. The mythology of the mundane civilization. Within history, the mundane hominid can be shown to exist in various stages of technological development. Within each era of human civilization, we describe the spectrum of the mundane civilization. Furthermore, if we make a distinction between the hominid and a race within mythology, we also describe the spectrum of the mundane civilization. Lastly, with regards to the paranormal and what the original civilization was built upon, if we describe extraterrestrial beings, we further describe the mundane as well. The empirical mundane civilization. The mundane civilization manifests as a technological, logistic, and infrastructure to include judicial law when the natural disasters are eliminated and ecology is replaced with an economy. The mundane manifests as an emergent property when a society reaches the state of being a utopia while choosing to become impoverished. To be without and lack resources is property of nature. Within a macroeconomy, member within the species are directly responsible for other members to be lacking of specific resources in an unnatural way. This is how the notion of classism manifests and gives rise to the ideal of slavery and racism. To include prejudice, the idea of belief that some member within a species are sufficiently different enough to warrant different unethical and immoral treatment and thus subjugation. What needs to be made clear is that the mundane is not built on inequality, but instead exists when subjectively inequality is a possibility. The mundane manifests from the macro. The macro have a mutualistic mentality with the prosperity of the whole first on their mind as they progress out of direct conflict with nature and the ecosystem. It is possible for social groups to retain the mentality of the prosperity of the endeavor within the groups and never domesticate members of their species to the point of poverty, inequality, and or cartel property as a byproduct. The My02cent multiverse cosmological mundane civilization. In the context of My02cent multiverse cosmology, the subjective quality of race does not apply to the mundane species in an empirical way. Instead, in the context of My02cent, the term race as it is utilized within the spectrum of the mundane empirically implies to the spectrum of interdimensional or intertemporal being within a single species. The most important quality of a mundane species is the ability to interbreed within a single species. That is to say, endeavor members are of the same species if they are able to interbreed and produce hereditary offspring. By this definition, different races would also have to be different species if they could not interbreed and would be infertile or would produce sterile offspring when the breeding process proved to be possible. Glossary of terms. Health is harmony within the body. When all the processes of the body are working together, we describe health. Illness is disharmony within the body. When all the processes of the body are not working together, we describe bad health or illness or disease.